Hello everyone, in nod-krai's second patch, the head of the Curatorium of Secrets, Nefer, will be the one new 5-star character releasing in version Luna 2. In version Luna 1, Lauma was released as a support introducing the Lunar-Bloom reaction. Nefer fully utilizes this lunar reaction as a powerful Lunar-Bloom oriented DPS, and by also taking advantage of the strong Lunar-Bloom buffs provided by Lauma, Nefer is looking to be yet another top tier DPS. So in this comprehensive guide, I will be explaining how Nefer works, the best ways to build her potential best teams, and analyzing her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Pretty much everything you need to know with simple and practical explanations, while also giving more detailed analysis that is backed by TC, including plenty of pre-release calcs on Nefer. Also, compared to my other full character guides, I am making this Nefer one a bit earlier than usual, so there won't be any footage or information from the official live stream this time around. Any important updated info from either the live stream or the early access content creator server will be added to the pinned comment below. Before explaining Nefer's kit, it's important to first understand how Lunar-Bloom actually works, as it plays a key role in how Nefer's kit functions. Normally, when you apply Hydro and Dendro on an enemy, you trigger Bloom and spawn a Bloom core where Dendro is the strong aura of the reaction. The core will explode after 6 seconds, but you can apply Electro on the core to trigger Hyperbloom, apply Pyro on the core to trigger Verdant, or if you have Nilou on the team to make the Bloom cores bountiful cores, any Dendro cores made will immediately explode. When Nefer or Lauma is on a team, and you apply Hydro and Dendro on an enemy, you trigger Lunar-Bloom. But nothing really drastically changes with the reaction compared to normal Bloom. You still get a Bloom core, the core still reacts with Electro, Pyro, and Nilou the same way, and the damage of Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Verdant is the exact same as it is normally, and this fact is very important to realize. Even though you trigger Lunar-Blooms when creating Dendro cores with Nefer or Lauma on the team, there is no new Lunar-Bloom damage coming from the actual reactions. The only sources of Lunar-Bloom damage are Nefer's special charge attacks, her C6, and also Lauma's hold skill attack and her C6, so any buffs that increase Lunar-Bloom damage will only increase these specific damage sources, not any of the Bloom related reactions. Thus, even with Nefer or Lauma on a team, Bloom cores exploding on their own, or if Nilou is still regular Bloom damage, proccing Hyperbloom still results in regular Hyperbloom damage, and proccing Verdant is still regular Verdant damage. So how does Lunar-Bloom differ from normal Bloom? The only thing that's different is that when you trigger Lunar-Bloom to create a Dendro core, after 2.5 seconds you obtain one Verdant dew. Only one Verdant dew can be produced at a single time, but if you trigger Lunar-Bloom again while a dew is being made, the next Verdant dew will start production, but you'll only produce a portion of the next dew depending on when you proc the second reaction. Let's say you trigger Lunar-Bloom 1 second after you proc the first one. At this time, there is 1.5 seconds remaining on the first dew, but the timer of the second dew from the second Lunar-Bloom already starts ticking while the first one is still being made. So when the next dew actually starts generating, you'll only get 1 second out of the 2.5 seconds needed because the other 1.5 seconds was used up while waiting on the first dew to be completely made. Thus, you can't just trigger 6 instances of Lunar-Bloom to get 6 Verdant dews, for instance. You are ultimately limited by each dew needing 2.5 seconds to be made, so you need consistent Dendro and Hydro application at the proper timings for continual dew generation. And as you'll see, Verdant dews are extremely important for Nefer's kit. Nefer is a 5-star Dendro Catalyst main DPS who ascends with crit damage along with having a base 200 elemental mastery. She primarily scales with EM and revolves around dealing Lunar-Bloom damage with her abilities. Nefer has the same special passive as Lauma's, where she enables Lunar-Bloom for the party, buffs his base damage by 14% as long as Nefer has 800 EM, and counts as a nod-krai character for Moon Sign. However, Nefer's A1 passive makes the Lunar-Bloom reaction uniquely different. With at least 2 nod-krai characters in the party, after Nefer uses her skill, she turns any Dendro cores on the field into Seeds of Deceit. Any cores that would be made in the following 15 seconds also turn into Seeds of Deceit. These seeds don't do damage while on the field, so regular Bloom, Nilou-Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Version reaction damage just doesn't exist while this is active. Instead, Nefer can absorb nearby Seeds of Deceit with her charged attack to buff the damage of her charged attacks, namely her special ones called Phantasm Performance. Each seed she absorbs grants 1 stack of Veil of Falsehood for 9 seconds, and each Veil stack increases her special charged attack damage by 8%. She can have up to 3 Veil stacks, and at 3 stacks, Nefer also gains 100 additional EM. The damage buff is actually a multiplier increase, so at 3 stacks, the total 24% damage buff to Nefer's special charge attacks means that its damage gets multiplied by 1.24, which is a significant damage increase. Thus, Nefer's main playstyle focuses on her own personal damage rather than relying on the damage of the usual Dendro reactions. Nefer's special charge attacks are enabled by her elemental skill, making it the most important part of her kit. It has 2 charges, and when used, she deals damage, generates 2 or 3 dendro particles, and enters the Shadow Dance state, granting her resistance to interruption. During this enhanced state, Nefer can consume 1 Verdant Dew to use her special charge attack, Phantasm Performance, which doesn't drain any stamina. Each special charge attack has 5 hits, 2 from Nefer herself and 3 from her shades. The 3 hits from her shades are considered Lunar-Bloom damage, so they are the more important part of her charge attack in terms of damage. After using 3 special charge attacks or after 9 seconds, her Shadow Dance enhanced state ends. And again, Nefer's charge attacks absorb nearby Seeds of Deceit, which buff the damage of her special charge attacks via her A1 passive. Since Nefer has 2 skill charges and each skill allows for 3 special charge attacks, Nefer is looking to do 6 special charge attacks every rotation, meaning 6 total Verdant Dews are needed. Nefer's A4 passive aims to assist in dew generation. When Nefer uses her skill and enters the Shadow Dance enhanced state, if Lunar-Bloom is triggered by the party and Nefer enters the Slither state, she will make Verdant Dew faster, with the regeneration speed increasing up to 50% based on Nefer's EM. The Slither state is activated when you use Nefer's normal unenhanced charge attack. When this happens, she starts sprinting, similar to how Lauma turns into a deer when you use her normal charge attack. So Nefer's A4 passive only activates when you don't have any Verdant Dew to consume to perform her special charge attack, helping you get the resource to actually do so. With how we currently understand the passive, this helps you play Nefer in more suboptimal scenarios, such as if your Hydro character doesn't apply enough Hydro for enough Verdant Dews. But the best Nefer teams should have enough Verdant Dew generation normally, and because the Slither state sprint has a long animation, it is unlikely that it will be optimal, serving only as a failsafe when things go wrong. However, there is a possibility that some rotation tech is discovered post-release where you utilize Nefer's A4 passive to consistently fit in a Lauma's hold skill, which consumes all Verdant Dews. But in terms of pre-release expectations, Nefer's A4 passive doesn't seem that important. Nefer's Elemental Burst is simply a nuke of AoE dendro damage. It also consumes all her stacks of Veil of Falsehood to further increase the damage. However, Nefer's Burst is not considered Lunar-Bloom damage, so the damage isn't that impressive. Many rotations ignore her burst altogether to have a shorter rotation time, but you can definitely use it if it's available to help finish off enemies. In addition, Nefer's Burst can be helpful to use to fill any downtime in a rotation. Lastly, Nefer's Exploration passive is an expedition reward one, while also allowing you to gain some sort of intelligence from a variety of sources. That's everything on Nefer's base kit. For talent leveling priority, Nefer's special charge attacks make the large majority of her damage profile, so you want to prioritize leveling her skill, then burst if you're using it. Specific team rotations will be outlined in the team section, but for an overall explanation on how Nefer will be played, her general rotation goes something like this. Some teams start with a Nefer normal attack or skill to apply dendro so you can trigger Lunar-Bloom earlier to start Verdant Dew generation. Starting with Nefer's skill can be beneficial if you're using an Electro support to make sure you don't trigger Hyperbloom so Nefer can absorb Seeds of Deceit to buffer damage. However, if the rotation time is short enough, Nefer's skill cooldown can desync, so you may still want to start with a normal attack instead, or just fit in a burst to fill the time. Next, set up your support skills, allowing time for Verdant Dews to generate. Then use Nefer's skill to enter her enhanced state, then do 3 special charge attacks. This will end her enhanced state, but Nefer will have a second skill charge so you can skill and do 3 special charge attacks again. Then you can end the rotation with Nefer's burst if you want. 6 special charge attacks every rotation requires 6 Verdant Dews, so triggering Lunar-Blooms consistently is key. From what I've heard, you can hold down the attack button and Nefer will automatically perform her 3 charge attacks, but you can dash cancel each charge attack to shorten the overall rotation time, which increases the team's damage per second. You lose Nefer's second hit by doing so, but you still get all the shade hits, which are mainly what matter because they are the hits that deal Lunar-Bloom damage. But as always, remember that rotations may get further optimized with post-release testing. Next, here are the best builds for Nefer. For weapons, her signature Reliquary of Truth is her best in slot. It just gives a lot of crit and elemental mastery. With the passive fully active and including the substat, the weapon gives 8% crit rate, 120 EM, and 124% crit damage. If you have a spare Lauma signature, it's a strong 5-star alternative option for Nefer. The other 5-star elemental mastery catalysts such as Nahida's, Sitlali's, and Mizuki signatures are also fine to use as they perform similarly to Nefer's best 4-star free-to-play option, the nod-krai craft craftable catalyst. It gives EM and 48% damage bonus to Lunar-Bloom damage at R5, assuming you have Ascendant Gleam, which should be the case. Sacrificial Jade from the Battle Pass is also usable since it gives crit rate and EM. It's worse than R5 craftable at R1, but closes the gap with higher refinements. Lastly, there is a new 4-star weapon being added to the weapon banner in Luna 2 called Dawning Frost. It has a crit damage substat and gives EM after hitting an enemy with a skill or charged attack, so pretty much made for Nefer. At R1, it performs similarly to R5 of the nod-krai craftable, but if you do manage to pull extra copies, it becomes Nefer's best 4-star weapon. Here is a more detailed weapon comparison of Nefer's weapon options made by MeowTews. Feel free to pause to take a look as it includes some weapons I didn't explicitly mention. For artifacts, Nefer is a nod-krai main DPS that mainly deals lunar reaction damage, specifically Lunar-Bloom. So her clear best set and the only set you should really use is Night of Disguise Unveiling, as it gives elemental mastery, crit rate, and additional damage bonus to lunar reaction damage. For main stats, Nefer wants an EM Hourglass, EM Goblet, and Crit Circlet. An EM Circlet can be used if you have really good crit substats on it. Remember that Nefer primarily deals Lunar-Bloom damage with her abilities, which mainly scale with EM, but doesn't scale with regular damage bonus, so don't use a Dendro Goblet. For substats, prioritize crit, then EM. You can also build some energy recharge if you're using Nefer's burst, but generally it isn't that important of a stat for Nefer. Getting elemental mastery main stat artifacts with good substats is pretty difficult due to their rarity, so you may want to utilize your elixirs and dusts. Otherwise, best of luck. Now let's go over Nefer's Constellations. C1 gives Nefer additional EM scaling on the Lunar-Bloom portion of her special charge attacks. Since there are 3 Lunar-Bloom hits every charge attack, this is an extra 180 EM scaling for each charge attack, which also gets multiplied by her A1 passive buff. C2 enhances the A1 passive damage buff that Nefer gets from absorbing Seeds of Deceit. In summary, instead of the A1 passive giving 100 EM and multiplying her special charge attack damage by 1.24 at max stacks, with C2, Nefer gets 200 EM and has her special charge attack damage multiplied by 1.4 at max stacks. C3 increases her skill talent level by 3. With C4, when Nefer is on the field and in her enhanced state after using her skill, the Dendro res of nearby enemies will be decreased and Verdant Dews will be generated faster. The faster Verdant Dews currently looks fine as a quality of life for more comfortable charge attack dash cancels, but likely doesn't allow you to use Lauma's hold skill. C5 increases her burst talent level by 3, and lastly C6 gives Nefer more Lunar-Bloom hits on her special charge attacks. To fully utilize these extra Lunar-Bloom hits, you need to go through the entire charge attack animation, so you don't want to perform dash cancels with C6. Also, with Ascendant Gleam, Nefer's Lunar-Bloom damage is further elevated by 15%. Overall, pretty standard constellation strength for a newer 5-star limited DPS. Her C6 is a very large damage boost, but early constellations like C1 and C2 are pretty strong damage increases as well, especially since Nefer does the large majority of damage in her teams. For those of you looking to vertically invest into Nefer with early constellations and her signature weapon, the general priority of investment in terms of damage gain is as follows. After getting Nefer herself, you ideally get Lauma because she's a very strong Lunar-Bloom support who significantly increases Nefer's damage. Then Nefer C1 gives you slightly more damage than her signature weapon. Both are very strong however, and they do give pretty similar damage increases. So if you prefer the look of the weapon, that's perfectly fine. And of course, if you have a weapon better than the R5 craftable, the damage gain from her signature will be slightly lower. Nevertheless, you ideally want Nefer C1 and signature weapon before getting her C2. Now in terms of vertical investment on Lauma, while her C2 is very good for Nefer, Lauma's signature on Lauma is only a slight team damage increase. And in regards to her C1, which allows Lauma to heal, it is a nice quality of life and does open up team building options with sustain for Nefer, namely with C2 Nilou or Aino plus Nahida. However, Nefer does have a strong sustain option with Kuki. So if you're comparing the value of vertical investment for strictly damage, Lauma's C1 isn't better than getting Nefer's C1 and signature weapon first. Finally, let's go over Nefer's best team comps. In this section, I will be showing Nefer team DPS calcs using charge attack cancels from 2 different theory crafters, Vomfee and Marteen. As always, I want to remind you all that while considering results from different TC sources is healthy for a more overall understanding of performance, you should not directly compare results from different theory crafters as they all use slightly different assumptions when calcing, resulting in slightly different numbers, making it inaccurate to directly compare team DPS calcs from different sources. Keep this in mind to ensure you consume TC responsibly. Nefer teams need two main things. First, you need at least 2 nod-krai characters in the party for Ascended Gleam to activate Nefer's A1 passive, which significantly buffs her damage. And second, you need enough Hydro application to trigger consistent Lunar-Blooms for Verdant Dew generation. Nefer uses 6 special charge attacks every rotation. This requires 6 Verdant Dews total, which takes 15 seconds to make, so generating enough Dews in time for Nefer is extremely important. Nefer's best and most important support by far is Lauma. She is an insanely strong support for Nefer, increasing her damage by about 30% because she buffs the base damage of Lunar-Bloom by an additional 14%, provides Dendro Res Shred, and gives additional crit plus additive flat damage to Nefer's Lunar-Bloom damage, on top of counting as a second nod-krai character for the team. For the Hydro slot, while Yelan and Xingqiu are technically usable, their bursts require normal attacks to activate their all-field Hydro, and Nefer uses charge attacks. While you can technically do one normal attack before each charge attack every time, this needlessly extends the rotation and reportedly feels bad to play. You can technically avoid using normal attacks by alternating skill and burst every rotation on Xingqiu and just rely on his Rain Sword orbitals for Hydro application, but in my opinion this isn't very practical since the orbitals can easily break. Thus, I don't recommend using Yelan or Xingqiu, especially since Aino is given for free and is overall the best offensive Hydro option even at C0, at least until Columbina is released, since she enables shorter rotations and provides additional buffs with C1 and C6. For the last support slot, Nahida is the best buffer for damage because her burst increases the on-fielder's EM. While this team is on paper Nefer's highest DPS team on release with Aino Constellations, the team doesn't have any sustain other than Prototype Amber on Nahida or if you have C1 Lauma. To fit in defensive utility, instead of using Nahida, you can use options like Barbara and Seedreen as healers, but there are better options since they mainly just heal. Diona and Baiju are usable since C6 Diona gives EM and Baiju busts Lunar-Bloom damage with his A4 passive. However, both of their cooldowns force Nefer's rotation time to be extended to at least 20 seconds, decreasing the overall team DPS and making them suboptimal sustain choices for Nefer. Zhongli is a fine option since he gives a strong shield and grants Res Shred. However, his best artifact set for the team is Silken Moon Serenade, which requires his pillar to hit enemies, and this can be fairly inconsistent. But the overall best looking sustain option available is Kuki. She provides healing, has very short field time, and can easily utilize the instructor set to buff Nefer's EM. And her Electro app doesn't look to interfere with triggering enough Lunar-Blooms for Verdant Dews. Another way to introduce healing into the team is to replace Aino with Kokomi, allowing you to keep Nahida. Just like with the Kuki team, the Kokomi team is a strong team option for Nefer that incorporates defensive utility. However, she does have some flaws. The Hydro application from her jellyfish does have limited range, and Kokomi only has long enough Hydro application with a normal attack dash into skill combo or by bursting. She can also use sacrificial fragments for shorter rotation times, but even at R5 you won't get the skill cooldown reset 20% of the time. One more way of adding additional defensive utility is to use the pairing of Farina plus Nefer, though Kuki can also be used. The Farina and Nefer duo has the benefit of not having to rely on circle impact, as well as having the highest team DPS if you only have C0 Aino. However, while you have Nefer as a shield bot, the team will remain at 50% HP from Farina's HP drain. And more importantly, you would much rather use Farina and Nefer for other DPSs that have much better synergy in another team rather than using them with Nefer. Lastly, if you have C2 Nilou, she can be used in place of Aino, where she can be slightly better than C6 Aino when Nahida is the final support. If you replace Nahida with someone like Baiju for defensive utility, however, C2 Nilou isn't that impressive even compared to C0 Aino. So if you want more sustain while getting increased damage from C2 Nilou compared to the other team options, you'll want Lauma C1. But if you have a lot of vertical investment in Nefer and her supports, C2 Nilou is a very strong option for her. Now if you don't have Lauma, what are your options for Nefer teams? The best current option you have is to replace Lauma with Nahida, and of course keeping Aino to maintain Ascended Gleam. Then you can use any of the sustain options I previously mentioned, with the best one still being Kuki. And while the team does significantly less damage compared to with Lauma, it should be good enough to clear content, especially in Patch Luna 2 where the endgame will favor Nefer. You can also use Nefer and Nahida with the Farina and Nefer duo, but while these teams also look fine, again you are likely much better off using Farina and Nefer in other teams where they have much more value. Now if you don't have Nahida, you can use Kale or Dendro MC, but if they are your only options as a Dendro support, the actual best choice is to just wait for Columbina or a Lauma rerun. For some additional TC and team DPS calcs, MeowTews as usual calc a ton of different Nefer teams, including scenarios where you don't charge attack cancel on Nefer. Link to those are in the description. To conclude this Nefer guide, I wanted to share my analysis on her place in the meta in terms of overall strength and pull value. Nefer is looking to be yet another top DPS releasing a nod-krai, provided you have Lauma. On her release in Luna 2, Nefer's highest DPS team with Lauma, C6 Ino, and Nahida is in a similar range with Veresa's best Shepherd's Overload team, assuming you're not doing any crazy combos on Mawika. However, this team doesn't have any real sustain without Lauma's C1, so the team won't perform that well in practice for most people, and a team with defensive utility will be preferred. On top of that, most people won't have many Ino constellations in Luna 2. When considering this more realistic context, Nefer teams with defensive utility and limited Ino constellations are still top tier based on early calcs, performing similarly to Flynn's, as the two are effectively the same character in different niches, as well as the general Notland DPSs in terms of overall team DPS. But of course, this is assuming you have Lauma. Just like how Escoffier is strong for Skirk and Anefa is strong for Flynn's, Lauma is really strong for Nefer, mainly because she provides so many buffs as a Lunar-Bloom support, significantly increasing Nefer's damage output. Lauma helps activate Ascended Gleam, buffs the base damage of Lunar-Bloom by an additional 14%, provides Dendro Res Shred with her skill, gives additional crit to Lunar-Bloom damage with her A1 passive, and grants additive flat damage to Lunar-Bloom damage with her burst. And since the additive damage buff takes into account Nefer's crit stats, it does make up a considerable portion of Nefer's total damage. It is not a coincidence that Nefer has 18 Lunar-Bloom hits every rotation with her 6 special charge attacks, and Lauma's burst without her ult skill buffs 18 instances of Lunar-Bloom damage. Lauma is made for Nefer. But the overall conclusion about the necessity of Lauma for Nefer is pretty much the same as the previous two character bundles. Nefer will still be fine without Lauma, as she will still be strong enough to clear content without her, especially in Luna 2 when the endgame modes will favor Nefer. Nevertheless, Lauma is by far Nefer's best in slot support, and there will be a significant damage gap if you play Nefer without her. However, unlike Skirk and Flynn's teams where a portion of the team's damage comes from the supports, Nefer does 80 to over 90% of her team's total damage, making vertical investment like her signature weapon and Constellations much more impactful. And because Lauma mainly only provides damage buffs for Nefer and not that much quality of life like Escoffier and Anefa do for Skirk and Flynn's, a C1 or R1 Nefer without Lauma does do similar damage as a C0 Nefer with C0 Lauma, and you won't miss out on that much significant quality of life. Even in Nefer's best teams with Lauma, there is a common sentiment going around in the community stating that Nefer isn't a very good DPS because she needs Lauma to be good, but Lauma herself and Hyperbloom teams deal more damage. And this is a fairly big misconception that I want to address. First, there is a good possibility that the overall strength of Lauma Hyperbloom teams is being overestimated by many people. There are calcs, some from more well-known figures in the Genshin community, showing Lauma Hyperbloom teams having upwards to 110k to 120k DPS. And while the actual math is likely correct, their assumptions may not properly reflect actual gameplay. At least in the theory crafting community that I regularly engage in, a good number of TCers think that Lauma Hyperbloom teams should more realistically calc at around 100k DPS at most, as they believe that the higher calc Hyperbloom DPS numbers assume too high of an average Hyperbloom per second, even more so if you don't use every ability perfectly off cooldown, which is likely the case for most people playing Hyperbloom. Second, once you consider any sort of vertical investment, Nefer teams will greatly outperform Lauma Hyperbloom teams. Of course, Nefer's Constellations and signature weapon will scale much better than a Hyperbloom team, but even with just better artifacts, Nefer will be much stronger. A good portion of Theory Crafters calcs, including all the calcs I've cited in this video, follow the KQM standard level of investment for their characters. The KQM standard is simply a way of normalizing character build investment such as talent levels and artifact quality and combat conditions across different calcs. So if you just crown Nefer's skills, she'll gain much more than crowning anything in a Hyperbloom team. And in terms of artifact quality, the KQM standard results in okay artifacts, but once you start optimizing for good artifacts, it is very easy for your artifacts to be above the KQM standard. The main flaw of Hyperbloom is its low damage ceiling. For your Hyperbloom trigger, only more EM will result in more damage, and with triple EM main stat, you can't even get EM substats on 3 artifacts. In contrast, Nefer scales with mainly EM and crit, allowing her to have more damage substats in every single one of her artifacts. And since Nefer does an overwhelming majority of the team's total damage, any extra substats greatly increase her damage compared to extra substats on a Lauma Hyperbloom team. So while the damage numbers of Lauma Hyperbloom and Nefer teams may look similar in the calcs you see, with better build investment past KQM standard, Nefer teams will quickly outperform Lauma Hyperbloom significantly. Third, you have to remember to not tunnel vision on damage numbers on a sheet, and consider the content that the teams will be up against. For example, in Luna 2 Stygian Onslaught, there will be 2 bosses that heavily incentivize nod-krai oriented teams. One gets greatly countered by Lunar reaction damage, while the other other has significantly lower HP if your team has Ascendant Gleam. While Lauma Hyperbloom can theoretically brute force both bosses at lower difficulties, Nefer's Lunar-Bloom teams look strong against both while having AoE and will likely be the best option to clear them at higher difficulties, and it is very reasonable to expect a similar type of shield to continue in Genshin's endgame for the majority of the nod-krai patches. And lastly, on top of potentially getting a new support that may synergize much better with Nefer than her existing options, just like with the other nod-krai characters, Columbina will very likely be a significant improvement in the Hydra support slot, further buffing Nefer teams and making her an even better DPS, whether you have Lauma or not. So with the right pieces, Nefer will be a top meta DPS for an account for the nod-krai meta. But even if you don't have Lauma, if you really like Nefer, that's of course a better reason to pull than meta. And that's everything I wanted to cover about Nefer. Of course, huge love and thanks to MeowTews, Vomfee, and Marteen, the 3 wonderful theory crafters who allowed me to share their calcs in this video. I couldn't have made this guide without them. I hope this guide and analysis was helpful to you all in giving you a better understanding of everything related to Nefer. Just clicking and watching the video helps the channel out immensely, and if you want to show even more support, consider liking or sharing the video, or click the subscribe button for more Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. Leave any questions in the comments, and for all of you planning on wishing, I wish you all the best of luck on your Nefer pulls.